Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be using this really fun stamp set from Hero Arts called You're Beautiful. I love all of these small flower and leaf elements, and small stamp sets like this that have a lot of pieces are great for building your own pattern. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, and I wanted to show you a really easy way to do a fun, colorful, soft and beautiful watercolor background. Sometimes with my watercoloring, I can get a little bit carried away and make it very complicated, but sometimes I also like to just go back to the basics and create something really soft and beautiful, and watercolor is the best way to do that. So I've started by assembling all of my stamped images just on top of that clear transparency grid sheet. You could definitely put it directly onto your watercolor paper while you're putting those stamps together, but I just liked being able to line up the words so it was perfectly aligned for my watercolor paper. So speaking of the watercolor paper, this is Strathmore cold press watercolor paper. It's the pre-cut 5x7 size, and I've placed that inside my MISTI stamp positioning tool so that I'm able to stamp these images multiple times to get a really good impression. Watercolor paper has a textured surface, so sometimes getting really solid lines on your stamped images can be a little bit challenging. So by using a MISTI stamp positioning tool, I'm able to stamp the stamps multiple times without anything shifting, and then I get a really good impression. I've stamped those images in VersaMark Ink, and you also saw me prep that area with an anti-static powder tool. Now I'm applying some Gilded embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. This is a really pretty gold shade. And of course, you could use any embossing powder color for this. I just really love the sparkle and shine of gold or metallic embossing powder. I'm using my heat tool to melt the embossing powder until it's smooth and melted. And then I taped down my watercolor piece to a hardboard. I always do this when I'm going to be using lots of water in my painting, and it just ensures that my watercolor paper doesn't warp too much as it's drying. I'm going to be using the Amy Tangerine watercolor set that I used a couple weeks ago. I'm giving it another shot. I had a lot of fun while I was on my cruise with this watercolor set. I found it really easy to use, and the colors were great. Now, the only thing I don't like about it, especially if I'm at home and I have the option, is the palette included is rather small. So since I have a bigger palette at home that I can use, I've pulled that out and mixed my paint colors off to the side using that palette. These colors are a little bit different than the original colors in the paint set, but they're not so different that you would have to mix new colors every time. You could definitely take the colors directly from that watercolor set and it would be beautiful. So the first thing I did was I liberally added clear, clean water over the entire surface of this watercolor piece. You want to make sure there's lots of water on the surface so that as you're adding these drops of color, it has lots of fluid to really move and get those colors wicking away from where you apply the color. If your watercolor paper is not wet enough, the paper will just absorb the color right away and then just sit there and it won't move around. So if your watercolor paints are not moving once you add them to your project, you may need to prep the paper you're using with more water in advance. You can kind of see the shine of the paper in the light there. You can see how wet my paper is. So when I first started dropping in color, some of them were mixing and kind of creating a little bit of a gray tone. I wasn't too in love with it. So I did come in and I kind of dried off my paintbrush off screen and then picked up some of that color and tried to take some of that gray away. And it worked out in the end. So now I'm dropping in some green shades. I'm just putting down the first layer of all of these colors. And as I paint this and then it starts to dry, it's going to fade back quite a bit. So I will be adding more intense color after everything has dried. So I'm adding in all of those shades, kind of using a little bit of water to soften the edge on some of these because I don't want it to have a really harsh edge quite yet. So I'm using just a wet paintbrush to wick away that color. I was losing some of the pink, so I came in with some more of that pink shade to make sure I have a nice underlayer of color. This is going to make sure I have all the colors that I had planned on the entire project. So I did take a paper towel and just dab up some of those areas that were really, really sopping wet. And then I used my heat tool to help speed up the drying process. You could definitely just let this air dry. You do not have to use a heat tool to do this. But since I had a heat tool on hand, I decided to speed up the process because, like usual, I'm a little bit impatient. So now I'm using my pink shade that I've mixed up and I'm adding more color on top of that dry layer. And this is going to really isolate those colors and they're not going to spread. And that's because the paper is dry as I'm adding the color. If you don't want your colors to move around on your project, apply your paint to dry paper. The paints will only move where there is moisture. So if your paper is completely dry, the paints won't bleed out of the edges. So I'm adding some blue on this larger flower in kind of the center area. And after I drop in some more intense color, I'll put some water on my brush and just soften those edges just a little bit. And I did that for all of the different flowers and even the leaves on this entire background piece. So you'll notice that I am not speeding ahead in the painting and I'm also not cutting away too much. And that's because sometimes I just want to show you guys the painting process and how easy and simple it can be. It is not daunting. It's a really, really fun way to create a card. And it doesn't take a whole lot of practice or a technique or skill to do it. It's just really, really fun. Adding in some drops of yellow just to finish off those little florals on those edges, and then also pink for these little berries. So I'm going to grab some green and start painting in all of these leaves. And you'll notice that I'm adding just a little stripe of green on each leaf and then moving on to the next leaf. That's because, like I've done with the flowers, I'm adding some intense color and then I'll put some water on my brush and just come in and spread out that color so that it has a little bit of variation in tone. I'm going to go over and paint all of these leaves, making sure I hit every single one. And then I added some other little intense dots of blue. So this is nearly done. I'm just going to add some yellow to this blue flower just to have a little bit of color difference. And because that blue is basically dry, the yellow doesn't mix with it and make green. So after my watercolor piece was completely dry, I used my paper trimmer to trim this down so that it's just slightly smaller than the size of a card front. Speaking of my card, I've created a card base out of some Nina Desert Storm environmental cardstock. And then I put some foam adhesive on the back of my watercolor piece. And I'm going to place that right over the top of this card front. And that finishes my card. I considered adding some sequins or some little glitter dots or something like that, but then I decided to keep it very simple and basically a flat one-layer card. It's technically not one layer because I did pop it up on foam tape, but essentially it's very easy to mail and nearly one layer. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I will be back very soon with another card video. Until then, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.